Every day, we come across hundreds of men and women in uniforms, gallantly dressed and armed with the confidence of a battle-tested individual. We see them, strike a moment of awe, and then leave glance as soon as our eyes see fit. These men and women seemingly may have a simple job from outside looking in, but we all know they took this job, knowing they're putting their lives in constant risk and danger. One carefree morning of January 2015, 74 policemen would put themselves in the extremes of danger to perform their sworn oath. More than half of them wouldn't make it out alive. The Special Action Force, previously called Philippine Constabulary Special Action Force, is the elite unit of the Philippine National Police, founded on May 16, 1983, by then Chief of the Philippine Constabulary Fidel V. Ramos and Renato de Villa. These soldiers are considered the best of the best, known by their motto, "By skill and virtue, we triumph." One can immediately identify a SAF unit by their beret patch insignia with the label Tagaligtas, or Rescuer. These soldiers undergo intense training under the SAF Commando course before even being allowed to wear the SAF beret. Apart from that, they will also receive training from the Hostage Rescue Team, Critical Incident Response Group, RAID, and Yamam, the Israeli counterterrorism unit. Their specialization includes counterterrorism, special weapons operations, security of internationally protected persons, and/or of state property of significance. Their main headquarters is located at Fort Santo Domingo in Santa Rosa, Laguna, with a sub-camp located in Camp Bagong Diwa in Upper Bicutan, Taguig. Since its inception in 1983, the SAF battalion has been involved in numerous high-risk missions, including multiple operations against insurgents such as New People's Army, Moro National Liberation Front, and other Muslim rebel groups, neutralization of robbery or bank and pawn shop holdups, armored car and election ballot convoys, protection of high-profile individuals on state visits and prison raids. They were also tasked to action during highly publicized events such as the Oakwood Mutiny in 2003, Zamboanga Siege in 2013, and the Marawi City Siege in 2017. Zulkifli Abdir was a Malaysian terrorist who was described as Southeast Asia's Osama bin Laden and on the FBI's Most Wanted. Commonly referred as Marwan, he had a head bounty of $5 million as a leader of the Kumpulan Mujahideen Malaysia, part of the Central Command of the Jemaah Islamiyah terrorist faction. He is also known as a bomb maker for several terrorist groups. He is described as a co-conspirator in the 2002 Bali, Indonesia bombing, which killed 202 people, mostly Australians and Indonesians, and further injured 209 people. This terrorist attack elevated his criminal status to a jihadi hero and an internationally wanted terrorist. He was placed on the manhunt list in August 2007 by the U.S. District Court of Northern California. With a target on his head, he decided to seek refuge in the Philippines under the protection of the Bangsamoro Islamic Freedom Fighters. Throughout his refuge, he had been involved in several militant Islamic activity and terrorist bombings and was also rumored to have trained several BIFF soldiers in explosives use, detonation, and building in exchange for his protection and sanctuary. Several warrants of arrest for multiple murder and multiple frustrated murder would be issued against him. Eventually, the Department of National Defense and Department of Interior and Local Government would allot a separate 7.4 million peso reward for his capture as well. Early reports claimed he died during a Mindanao airstrike in February 2012, but the body was never found. Official statements related to his supposed death were later retracted, and the manhunt ensued. Ahmad Usman Ibatabol, known as Abdul Basit Usman, was a Filipino bomb-making expert who led the Special Operations Group of the BIFF and had direct links to Abu Sayyaf and Jemaah Islamiyah. He first gained notoriety when he started conducting terrorist-related activities after being suspended as a member of the 105th Base Command Security Operations Group of the Moro Islamic Liberation Front. He is on the United States Reward for Justice program with a $1 million bounty on his head. Usman is directly involved on various public bombings, such as the Fit Mart Mall bombing in General Santos in April 2002, Tacurong City Public Market bombing in Sultan Kudarat on October 2006, and 2 Cotabato City bombings in October 2007. His extremist activities had left a total of 17 dead and 62 severely maimed civilians. Amin Bako, known as Jihad, is also a Malaysian terrorist and wanted by both U.S. State Department and the government of the Philippines for various bombing activities. He is a Jamaah Islamiyah member and an expert IED bomb maker as well. He is identified as one of the kidnappers of Tanwi De and Tanwi Wei, both tourists from Lahad Datu in Sabah, Malaysia in November 2012. He was also involved in the foiled kidnapping of Chinese trader Ting Ting Yon in Iligan City in May 2013. Oplan Exodus was the 10th of a string of high-risk missions that was targeting primarily Marwan. PNP SAF Director Getulio Napeñas had long been on the trail of the Malaysian terrorist, having been involved in various missions as early as 2010. The first of these, Oplan Pitas, in December 2010, was executed in Parang Sulu, but the mission failed because Marwan had escaped hours before they arrived. In July 2012, Oplan Smart Bomb was executed in Butig, Lanao del Sur, but Marwan was again able to escape. In December 2012, Oplan Wolverine was aborted because, according to Napeñas and Police Superintendent Train, some AFP commanders were hesitant to support the operation, citing it might risk the preparatory phase of the MILF peace process. In April 2013, Oplan Cyclops executed in Marawi, Lanao del Sur, but Marwan had again successfully escaped. 2 months after, June 2013, Oplan Cyclops 2 was executed, but the SAF Recon Company was compromised, forcing them to abort the operation. In March 2014, Oplan Wolverine 2 was executed in Barangay Libutan in Mamasapano, Maguindanao, but later called off after the 1st Mechanized Brigade withdrew its commitment for armed vehicle support. In May 2014, Oplan Wolverine 3 was executed, but the mission was aborted because of a notable presence of heavily armed troops in their target drop-off point. In November 2014, Oplan Terminator was executed, but later aborted when the local boats rented by the SAF capsized and broke down. 2 weeks later, December 2014, Oplan Terminator 2 was executed, but was later aborted as well when they encountered heavy armed groups along the river on their way to the target in Barangay Tucanalipao. Oplan Exodus is composed of 392 SAF commandos, whose mission is to execute a high-risk law enforcement operation, capture 3 high-value targets, and serve their warrant of arrests, who are believed to be hiding in Barangay Pitsandawan in Mamasapano. Their method relies on, as described by the police, a way-in, way-out, by-foot, night-only infiltration and exfiltration concept of operation. 2 main SAF companies will front the infiltration. The 84th Special Action Company, known as Seaborne Unit, will be composed of 38 SAF commandos, led by Police Superintendent Raymond Train. Their supporting unit is a 55th SAC, composed of 36 SAF commandos, led by Police Inspector Ryan Pabalinas. Their primary task is to serve as the blocking force for the 84th SAC within Barangay Tucanalipao. There's also a pool of 315 SAF troopers from the 4th Special Action Battalion tasked to support the 2 main units, the 41st, 42nd, 43rd, and 45th SAC. The 41st, 42nd, and 45th SAF companies will be tasked to secure the exits of both 84th and 55th SAC units after the mission is over, being deployed in strategic exit points along the Cabulnan River leading to the Maharlika Highway. Meanwhile, the 43rd unit is tasked to secure both ends of the main road. The target location is suspected to be some 15 kilometers away from the main road, with 4 Nipa huts as the primary points of assault. They are expected to arrive at the target location by 2:30 a.m. of January 25, and the assault plan is for a surgical operation of 30 minutes. January 24, 2015, 10 o'clock p.m., SAF commandos from the 84th SAC enter the Maharlika Highway. They are stopped by a military checkpoint manned by the 45th Infantry Battalion. The commandos identified themselves as the SAF troopers and disclosed their mission. The seaborne units are hidden inside a truck filled with corn. They would proceed to the established advanced command post and vehicle drop-off point along the Maharlika Highway and prepare until operation starts. At exactly 11:15 p.m., Oplan Exodus commenced. Together with two local action agents known as Cams and Astro acting as their guides, the seaborne unit advanced and threaded across the tall cornfields, deep irrigation canals, and wide marshlands between the borders of Barangay Tucanalipaw and Pinsandawan. Along the way, they would encounter deep and muddy irrigation river canals because of high tide, forcing a slight deviation to their planned route. The slight deviation of the course forced them to make a wider turn along the bridge in Tucanalipaw Road, which in turn would cause delay of the movement of their containment and blocking forces. From there, they would exchange prone positions and stealth walks across multiple open fields until they reach another irrigation canal, where just beyond is Marwan's hut in sight. Along the way, they would place markers visible only through their night vision goggles to guide their exfiltration route and serve as waypoint confirmation to the 55th SAC as well. At exactly 2 o'clock a.m., the 55th would depart from the VDOP on Maharlika Highway and start treading towards their target waypoints. January 25, 2015, 4 o'clock a.m., the seaborne unit had arrived at their target location in Barangay Pinsandawan. They were planned to arrive at 2:30 a.m. on site, but the open marshlands and high tide slowed them down along the way. The target hut where Marwan is suspected to be hiding is within sight, overshadowed by a thick foliage of banana trees around its vicinity. Usman's suspected hut is also nearby, less than half a kilometer away. According to the planned briefing, the 6-man forward recon team would be the main assault team and would be accompanied by teams 841 and 843 to the target area, while teams 842 and 844 would be in charge of the guard post of the enemy. The main assault team is led by Police Superintendent Train, backed up by Police Inspector Marasigan, SPO1 Franco, SPO4 Humalon, and their two snipers, PO1 Galvo and PO1 Makasasa. Team 841 is led by Police Senior Inspector Gednat Tabdi, while Team 843 is led by Police Inspector Rix Villarreal. The perimeter securing team, Team 842 and Team 844, is led by Police Inspector Rani Tyrus and SPO2 Hamiddan Tebeng respectively. 13 of the 43 commandos silently crossed the 30-meter wide river. Everyone from main assault and Team 841 were able to cross the river, except for PO3 Yogyog, who was left behind due to the difficulties crossing the river. They had noticeable difficulties crossing the river due to its turbulent currents that it almost drowned two of them. Foreseeing the tight window, Train told Tabdi that they are slowly running out of time and it'll be sunrise soon. They decided to pursue the assault with those who already crossed and had fixed their armaments. In an interview, SPO4 Humalon said, 4 a.m. na pero 13 pa lang kami nakakatawid ng ilog kaya nag-decide kami na kanain na namin. Kahit si Marwan na lang makuha kasi mag-uumaga na, aalis na sila para magsimba. Treading lightly, the 13 SAF commandos made their way in front of the target hut. Pointman for Team 841, PO2 Jovalin Lozano, led the way together with PO2 Jose Manaar Jr. When Manaar got off from his kneeling position and raised his rifle, a light went on inside the hut. He froze and slowly dropped back to prone position to reassess, then radioed Train that they might be compromised. When the light inside the hut went off after a minute, Train ordered the troops to engage and immediately formed an L formation to assault the hut. As PO2 Lozano moved forward, he tripped an improvised explosive device landmine and caused an explosion, causing injuries on his left shoulder plate and shrapnel wounds to Train's chest. Alarmed, Marwan opened one of the windows in his hut and then fired back at the commandos. The bullet barrage lasted about 15 minutes until one bullet hit Marwan in the chest, instantly causing his death. Train then ordered a ceasefire and instructed Team 841 to search the hut. 4:15 a.m., Police Senior Inspector Tabdi, together with a 5-man crew, assaulted the hut and conducted a sensitive site exploitation. From there, the lifeless body of Marwan would lie in front of them, suffering fatal gunshots on his chest. PO2 Discoro Basañez from Team 841 immediately conducted documentation and took several photos of both the dead Marwan and the insides of the hut. Meanwhile, Train made a text message to his SAF commander, Director Getulio Napeñas. At the time, Director Napeñas was in the tactical command post in Sharif Aguac, Maguindanao, about 12 kilometers away from where Seaborn was. The text message relayed, Mike 1, Bingo. In this message, Mike 1 was an exclusive term for the SAF troopers, meaning Marwan, while Bingo is a brevity code that means the primary aim of the mission has been accomplished. Despite injuries to one trooper, the whole team was in high morale, and Police Superintendent Train even managed to crack a joke saying, "Once we get out of here, we will treat ourselves to Jollibee burgers." Thereafter, they were about to conduct an eye scan for retina recognition, and then later carry the cadaver on a body bag, but were suddenly held back when gunshots were fired from the direction of Usman's hut. Additional gunfire came from Marwan's security group as well. Tabdi then decided to sever the left index finger of the dead Marwan for later DNA identification and gave it to Train. After their SSC, Tabdi shouted, "Bingo, bingo, prepare for withdrawal." They would be barraged by bullets from where Usman's hut was for a good 5 to 8 minutes and then seize. During the barrage, Usman and Jihad would use the time to escape. Meanwhile, at the TCP, Director Napeñas would finally inform the upper echelons of the PNP for the time on target concept. He sent a text message to the following: PNP OIC Espina, PNP Chief Directorial Staff Marcelo Garbo, PNP Director of Intelligence Charles Calima, PNP Director of Operations Ricardo Marquez, and PNP Director for Police Community Relations. The message reads, "For OIC PNP from the SAF, update regarding operations against HVTs." Based on the report of the ME, J.I. Marwan was neutralized, but the body was left behind due to heavy volume of fire and one wounded SAF trooper. Meanwhile, Train and Tabdi's team would traverse back to the other side of the river by 5 o'clock a.m., where the rest of the 84th are waiting. They then followed their exfiltration plan and treaded slowly towards the rendezvous point where they would meet with the 55th SAC unit. Following the delay of their movement, the 55th had just traversed the bridge along Tucanalipao Road. They had moved out from the VDOP at 2 o'clock a.m. earlier, following waypoint confirmations from the 84th. They are still about a kilometer away from their designated waypoint. The heavy load of ammunition and the 90 recoilless rifles files ultimately slowed them down, as well as forcing them to take frequent stops to rest. Upon crossing the wooden bridge to a cornfield within Sitio Amilil, they heard several men shouting from the opposite side of the river. Police Inspector Pabalinas ordered them not to engage the hostile men and form a defensive formation in their perimeter. Their only method of concealment were low-lying cornfields, which were about a male's neck height at best. Pabalinas then reported this to the TCP. Napeñas overheard the information on the radio and directed POG Lloyd Ensoy, the assigned radio base operator in the TCP, to broadcast, "Pag na-identify na kalaban at may dalang baril, huwag na palapitin at i-engage na." They would later identify the men to be Moro Islamic Liberation Front combatants armed with high-caliber rifles. A stalemate for a few minutes ensued until the number of men beyond the river increased. They formed a box to prepare for defense and provide 360-degree security until the sun dawned on the marshlands and inevitably revealed their position. By 5:20 a.m., another gunfight would emerge, this time between the 105th and 118th Base Command Troops of the MILF and the 55th SAC. This was then heard by the seaborne crew, who were now in their planned exit drill to rendezvous with the 55th. They were already about 900 meters away from Marwan's hut when they themselves got re-engaged in another gunfight from other responding rebels. Following the delay of the advanced troops, it was only around this time that the 41st, 42nd, and 45th had moved out from the ACP in Maharlika Highway and advanced towards their respective waypoints. Reports of the ongoing gunfight had reached Director Napeñas. Understanding the potential of the enemy in the area, he began to coordinate with the military and updated his superiors. At 5:37 a.m., Napeñas called Brigadier General Manolito Orense, representative to the Ad Hoc Joint Action Group, to request coordination with the MILF of the ongoing SAF operation. A few minutes later, 5:43 a.m., he received a text message from 4th Special Action Battalion Commander Hendrix Mangaldan saying, "Padami na tao, request loudspeaker operation." In this message, he was referring to the already amassing forces of combined rebel groups within the locations of the 84th and 55th SAC units. The loudspeaker operation possibly refers to requesting permission for their forces to remove their suppressors and open fire. At that time, it was also reported that these civilians were already fleeing from the area. At 5:45 a.m., PNP Chief Director General Alan Purisima, who was serving a 6-month suspension, informed then President Benigno Noynoy Aquino Jr. that Maruan was killed and one SAF trooper wounded. The body of Maruan was left behind but pictures were taken. The troopers are now in withdrawal phase and progress report to follow. This was the first official confirmation about the death of Maruan. PNP OIC Director General Leonardo Espina, who replaced Purisima as the PNP Chief, replied to Napeña's text message and said, "Congratulations, Leo." For the next hour, the gunfight would slowly intensify. Both the 84th and 55th SAC units had already been pinned and sustained several injuries, having been under heavy artillery and mortar fire. At 6:38 a.m., GPH-CCCH Chair Carlito Galvez and its Head of Secretariat Major Carlos Sol learns about the firefight via text message from MILF-CCH Chair Rashid Ladiasan. The message reads, "Salambro, firefight erupted between the AFP and the 105 BC at Tucanalipao, Mamasapano. The AFP troops moved in without any coordination, and this is difficult to control to avoid encounters between our forces when there is no coordination. This is clearly disregarding and violating the ceasefire. Now with that situation, the only option is to cease fire, otherwise it will escalate further." At that time, General Galvez and Major Sol were in Butig, Lanao del Sur, accompanying the members of the independent decommissioning body in a site visit to Camp Bushra, an MILF camp. GPH-CCCH verifies the firefight with the 1st Mechanized Infantry Brigade, 601st Brigade, G3, 6th Infantry Division, and the Police Provincial Office, Maguindanao. PPO Maguindanao informs the GPH-CCCH that troops belonging to the PNP SAF were involved in the encounter. Major Sol would again receive a text message from Ladiasan around this time saying, "We have to cease fire, bro, before it's too late. Ano kaya, bro, kung puntahan natin sa area, baka may staff kayo kasama at IMT, bro, ma-invite mo sila." Galvez and Sol then planned to link up with Ladiasan and meet with Ustad Zacaria Goma, commander of the 105th BC MILF troops. By 7 o'clock a.m., the 55th SAC unit was already fighting not to be overrun by the rebels. Police Inspector Pabalinas radioed the TCP and requested immediate artillery support and reinforcements. This was the first emergency call from the 55th SAC asking for help. Having been pinned and outgunned, they were already starting to lose men. Their current location placed them in a very precarious situation, being in the middle of an island of cornfield where beyond is a vast open marshland with high-rise coconut trees at the far end. The spontaneous response from all the rebel groups within the area were already starting to overwhelm the 55th SAC, all mostly acting on their own and without a higher personnel to contain their actions. The response was merely them as locals fighting a common enemy. This was described as a local cultural phenomenon known as Pintakasi, which in the simplest terms meant when an enemy enters your land, every male grabs a weapon and fights. Pintakasi is a centuries-old indigenous community activity where members help each other for the benefit of everyone in their community. In general, it is a positive force in bringing together people in times of need and trouble. However, it is also applicable in times of threat, where an enemy of one becomes the enemy of all. By 7:26 a.m., Director Napeñas texted Espina about the situation. He said, "The containment blocking force was engaged 2 kilometers east of Tucanalipao GC 68006 65717. There was heavy firefight and SAF troops suffered casualties. Extraction is ongoing and support from the AFP was requested." At 7:53 a.m., Napeñas sent another text message, this time to PNP SAF Deputy Chief Noli Talino saying, "Noli, location of SAF troops GC 68006 65717 and 68234 65056. Nasa paligid ng 1st GC mga kalaban and tuloy pa rin heavy firefight. Baka pwede hingi artillery support." By 8:20 a.m., Colonel Henry Del Rosario tasked the 62nd Division Reconnaissance Company to rendezvous with the blocked 42nd and 45th SAC units, then tasked Bravo Company from the 45th Infantry Brigade to take a different route to try to reinforce the pinned 55th SAC forces. The 62nd DRC would rendezvous successfully with the 42nd and 45th SAC by 10:30 a.m., but Bravo Company wouldn't be able to reach the 55th due to the open marshland, preventing their 2 V-150 armored vehicles from advancing. The 84th SAC would request reinforcements by this time as well, providing their current location and informing the ground command that they are surrounded by the MILF, but this was voided by General Edmundo Pangilinan, citing the ceasefire process would be put at risk. Around this time, Napeñas would also send a message to Colonel Del Rosario saying, Hener, good AM. Ito location, marami kalaban, GC 688633. Request indirect fire. Wala mga civilian doon kanina pa. By 9 o'clock AM, the 84th would be re-engaged by MILF members somewhere around 700 meters where the pinned 55th SACR. Police Senior Inspector Tabdi would receive a message from Police Senior Inspector Lyndon Espe, also a member of the 84th SAC and a designated map plotter from the TCP. In his message, he advised Tabdi not to use the previous extraction route as the 55th had been pinned in there. He would then provide new coordinates for the alternate extraction route, and this would take them east along the river and away from the location of the 55th. The 42nd and 45th SAF unit, who by that time was also still far off from their designated rendezvous point, would hear gunshots from their current location. They were only about 2 kilometers from the known location of the 55th, but they would also be blocked by an estimated 300 combined armed rebel forces across a large open marsh. At this time, the CCCH and International Monitoring Team would assemble at the IMT headquarters in Cotabato City and officially create the Joint Crisis Committee team. The JCCT would be composed of 2 groups. The first group would be headed by 118th PC Commander Wahid Tundok, whose mission was to directly go to the encounter site and inform the BIAF men of the ceasefire agreement. The second group is headed by Chairman Ladyasan, together with Ronnie Arap and Dave Junco of the GPH-CCCH, Butch Malang and Tox Opam of the MILF-CCCH, Suharto Elhad of JCMP Kitango, and Mr. William Hovland of the IMT. Their mission is to proceed to Barangay Tuka, where the tactical command post is. Commander Goma of the 105th BC, while involved in the discussion of the ceasefire, remained in his residence in Barangay Kuloy. By 11 o'clock AM, Police Superintendent Train called for artillery support. During the same time, he received a text from the TCP to cease fire. This was an order from GPH-CCCH Chair Galvez, who had asked the PNP to enforce a ceasefire half an hour earlier. The gunfights would subside for a full hour. During the downtime, the remaining seaborne units would find refuge at a nearby hut, free from sporadic gunfire. By 12 PM, the barrage would ensue after a full hour. The JCCT team meanwhile would arrive at the residence of Commander Goma in Barangay Kuloy, together with Mamasapano Mayor Benzaram Batuan. The facilitation of a ceasefire agreement would immediately ensue. By the end of discussion at 12:30 PM, Ladyasan would send a message to Major Sol. The message reads, "Papunta na kami sa military sa 45 IB. Sila Wahid mag-pull out tropang 105th BC. Kami naman with IMT sa military para tumulong mag-extricate PNP SAF. Paalis na kami sa Kuloy base ni Zakaria Goma. Paki-inform lang wag mag-alarm sa bahay ni Goma. Marami tropa, security niya yon." They would arrive at the 45th IB base by 12:55 PM. Upon their arrival, the group informed Police Superintendent Henry Mangaldan, Police Senior Inspector Michael Mangahis, and Lieutenant Colonel Romeo Bautista, commanding officer of the 45th IB, that a ceasefire had been agreed upon together with the 2 BIAF commanders. At this time, the pinned 55th SAC is still fighting for their lives, but most of them are either dead, heavily injured, or out of ammunition. At exactly 1 o'clock PM, Razor, the call sign for Police Senior Inspector John Gar Erana of the 55th SAC, would send his last call for support to PO3 and Soy. Erana's last words were, TCP, mauubos na kami." The ground command in TCP would officially lose contact with the 55th after this transmission. The 84th, meanwhile, having been re-engaged with the rebel groups, decided to hold their position. Most of them are severely exhausted from hours of walking and carrying their injured comrades. Police Superintendent Train even recalled hearing some of his comrades shouting, "I love you mommy, I love you baby, and I love you Seaborn." By 2 PM, the 84th SAC troopers found a small hut and took refuge. Inside were sugar canes and took this opportunity to sever hunger and dehydration, and so they started nibbling on them. While they were resting and nibbling, Police Senior Inspector Tabdi and Police Inspector Tyrus moved out. The 2 team leaders would attempt to push towards the enemy forces, pinning the 55th, and they would be accompanied by the rest of Team 842. Train tried to stop and convince them to wait and reassess, but the 2 commandos would not be deterred. When they were advancing, they too would be met with gunfire, forcing them to withdraw into a vegetation field where there was not enough concealment. Meanwhile, the JCCT committee would arrive at the engagement zone around this time, implementing the ceasefire agreement, and from there, MILF troops would move out slowly out of the area for the next 2 hours. At 4 p.m., Napeñas would receive a text message from Police Western Mindanao Director Charles Calima saying, "Kabayan, we are worried about our operating elements. Anything we can do, magsabi ka lang. I hope this text message is not exaggerated. Receive this unvalidated info from Maguindanao. FYI po, confirm, tumawag yung CA natin sa loob. 22 KIA pinagtatanggalan ng gamit, sir." May 8 pa raw ang hinahabol ni Commander. Emergency, sa ilog na punta ang 8 tropa. May pinugutan ng BIFF 2 SAF, sir. Yung 8 nasa sitio Inibog malapit sa Pulangi. Baka naubusan ng bala yung tropa, sir. The remaining seaborne units would also receive radio transmissions that the crew of Tabdi and Tyrus would succumb to enemy forces themselves. Meanwhile, the JCCT members finally entered the engagement site, and this is where they would find cadavers from the 55th SAC scattered on the ground and in a nearby river. They would initiate a retrieval operation and would go back an hour later with 2 kuliglig tractors and an ambulance. By 5:48 p.m., the first of 3 white phosphorus flares would be deployed about 700 to 800 meters southwest of the location of the holding seaborne units. A few minutes later, another round was deployed and landed about 400 to 500 meters south of them, and by 6 p.m., the third and last phosphorus flare was fired. The 3 phosphorus flares are used in the military to conceal and cover movement of troops, as well as markers for the artillery team to calculate location and minimize friendly fire. The MILF would announce that their troops had withdrawn by 6 p.m., and this would officially cease all gunfights from involved MILF personnel. An hour later, the ACP would receive reports that the armed groups involved would also withdraw from the area. Around 7:30 p.m., several civilians would go to Maharlika Highway and report to the station troops. They reported that they found dead bodies of 34 SAF troops and a civilian named Badrudin Langalen, a resident of Poblacion Tucanalipao. Alongside them are 5 bodies of those 34 SAF members belonging to the 55th SAC. The SAF troops present in the highway took high notice of the cadavers, as they knew they were SAF commandos, but all of them were stripped of uniforms and firearms. The crisis team would also suspend body retrieval operations due to darkness and security concerns. During this time, teams from the 4th Special Action Brigade and Army's 6th Infantry DRC penetrated the location of the 84th SAF. By 11:45 p.m., they would link up with the seaborne units. A casualty evacuation would commence and eventually complete by 4:30 a.m. of January 26. By 7:30 a.m., all of them would be transported to PPO Maguindanao via a U.S. helicopter, transporting them to Cotabato City for medical treatment to the injured. Mayor Ampatuan would provide clearance and instructions for the CCCH and IMT to continue retrieval operations. From there, they would retrieve the remaining bodies from the 55th SAC. Some were found in the middle of the cornfield, while some were found deep below the Cabulnan River. All of them would be found stripped of their uniforms, firearms, and personal belongings. According to them, nakabrief na lang yung iba. By midday, 29 cadavers of the 55th SAC were retrieved by the Mamasapano local police together with the help of local civilians. The cadavers would then be transported to Camp Shonko in Awang, Maguindanao, and then subsequently turned over to ARMM Police Regional Office for processing and forensics examination. At this point, 34 of the 36 troopers from the 55th SAC had been found. 2 of them are still missing, PO2 Efraim Mejia and PO2 Christopher Lalan. At 2 p.m. that afternoon, PO2 Christopher Lalan would emerge in Maharlika Highway after almost a day of hiding in the River Lilies and engaging some rebels in his escape. He would be the lone survivor from the 55th SAC. In an exclusive interview, he said he told his senior officer POG Noel Golocan was already mortally wounded at that point.
Kasi sa inyo, kung sabi ko, Sergeant, parehas ang mangyari sa atin lahat dito. Mag-attempt lang ako na tatakas para kung mabuhay ako, alang-alang sa anak ko. Parehas man din ang mangyari sa atin lahat dito. Kapatayin din tayo lahat. Ang inisip ko, kaya ako nag-iisip na mag-eko-eko.
He also mentioned that when he started extricating, sniper fire converged on his trail. One of his SAF comrades and classmates, PO2 Romeo Sempron, stood up from the cornfield and acted as a decoy. His gallant bravery worked, as the sniper fire had been redirected at him, enabling Lalan to crawl out of gunfire and take refuge into the river. He would suffer a blast injury and ruptured eardrum. Later that afternoon, the dead body of PO2 Efraim Mejia would be found by local government officials of Mamasapano. At 5 o'clock p.m., a report came from Integrated Provincial Hospital Office in Maguindanao. POG Virgel Villanueva from the 84th SAC had been declared dead on arrival. He had been fighting through fatal gunshot wounds in his head. In its conclusion, Oplan Exodus would suffer 44 deaths and 8 injured commandos. 35 died from the 55th, while 9 perished from the 84th. The 84th SAC would suffer 9 KIPO and 12 WIPO casualties. The 55th, on the other hand, would suffer 35 KIPO and 1 WIPO. 3 civilian casualties were identified as well. 1. Badrudin Langgalan, a mid-20s farmer whom the 55th had snatched from his bicycle after crossing the bridge at the break of dawn. He was tied to the bridge with a plastic cuff and was later found to be bullet-ridden and head almost blown out. 2. Sarah Tot, an 8-year-old child who was shot by stray bullets in her upper back while escaping on a bangka. And 3. Muhammad Ambilang, a 33-year-old civilian who was shot by P.O. Tulalan during his escape. Families of the slain commandos and Filipinos all over the country cried in outrage upon hearing the news. The incident created widespread condemnation for both the rebel groups who were involved and the officials who crafted Oplan Exodus. At the same time, the Bangsamoro Basic Law, the government's effort to finally settle the decade-long war in Mindanao, had been put into serious peril. 2 critical points of issue were initially criticized. 1. Director Napeñas' time-on-target approach, and 2. The involvement of a suspended Alan Purisima in the operations. Point number 1. Napeñas' judgment to use a time-on-target approach. This time-on-target approach is a coordination strategy that times the release of information about the operation only upon the moment the main effort arrives at the target area. According to him, this tactic was organized mainly because of one thing: trust issues following the series of failed attempts for the past few years. Previous operations such as the Wolverine and Terminator had been aborted either because there was no ample support from the AFP or there was evidence of leakage. Terminator 2 in particular was aborted because the infiltration route was heavily guarded by armed rebel groups. Police officials said Napeñas had speculated that sensitive and operational information were deliberately leaked during major operations and had lamented that high-value targets were being coddled by the MILF, whose members had a lot of contacts within the AFP. When then President Noynoy Aquino gave instructions to both him and Purisima to coordinate the plan with the AFP, he voiced a security concern and even cited that some AFP personnel were married to local people. He also mentioned the operation by the 6th Infantry Division and 1st Mechanized Infantry Brigade against Maruan in June 2014, which failed in capturing the terrorist. Point number 2. Director General Alan Purisima's involvement in the execution of Oplan Exodus. It was to everyone's knowledge that Purisima was suspended at the time of the operation by virtue of Special Order No. 9851 issued by the OIC-PNP on December 16, 2014. With his involvement, the idea that he and Napeñas ignored the PNP chain of command by excluding OIC-PNP Espina was established. OIC-PNP Leonardo Espina, as we have known earlier, was informed of the operations only a full hour after the HVT was killed. Then DILG Secretary Mar Rojas was also not informed, who also only learned about the operation at 7:43 a.m. of January 25, right about the heat of the gunfight between the 55th SAC and the rebel groups. It was also important to take note that Napeñas had proposed the time-on-target concept to both Purisima and then President Noynoy Aquino, which held several closed-room discussions. Hard evidence also claimed Purisima provided assurance to Napeñas about relaying the updates to the commanders of the ground forces in Mindanao. On January 26, Napeñas would be relieved of his duties as the PNP SAF director a day after the incident. He would be replaced by Police Chief Superintendent Noli Talino, his deputy director. A PNP-Board of Inquiry would also be created to investigate the facts and circumstances surrounding the bloody encounter in Mamasapano, headed by Police Director Benjamin Magalong as chairman and Police Director Catalino Rodriguez and Chief Superintendent John Sosito as members. On top of establishing the facts and circumstances, they were also tasked to review the efficiency, effectiveness, and responsiveness of both the GPH and the MILF in relation to handling the ceasefire process that unfolded that day. MILF figurehead Al-Hajj Murad Ibrahim also announced that they created a special investigative committee to be headed by Chairman Ustad Said Abdul Salam. The MILF-SIC will be tasked to 1. Shed light on what happened on January 25 and 26 in Mamasapano. 2. Assess the conduct of BIAF in relation to their code of conduct. And 3. Propose action points to the MILF leadership. President Benigno Aquino III would also deliver his first public speech that same evening regarding the Mamasapano incident. In this, he would deliver important citations such as declaring January 30 as a National Day of Mourning to honor the bravery of the fallen commandos. He also stressed the importance of establishing facts before drawing out actions that would otherwise hinder the ongoing peace process, and that the created PNP-Board of Inquiry would be the best department to establish the narratives. In the morning of January 29, 3 C-130 planes would arrive at the Villamor Air Base in Pasay City at exactly 10:05 a.m. These C-130s would carry 42 of the 44 caskets of slain commandos in the bloody encounter. The two other SAF commandos who were Muslim, PO2 Aman Esmula and PO3 Jatsin Asjali, would be buried in their respective hometowns of Zamboanga and Cotabato City following Islamic rites. President Noynoy Aquino, who was expected by the PNP to be present, did not attend the initial ceremony at the airbase, and this drew a flag of outrage. He was later revealed to have attended the Mitsubishi car plant opening in Santa Rosa, Laguna. From there, the bodies would be brought to Camp Bagong Diwa in Taguig, where a vigil will be held to honor them. According to PNP-OYC Espina, the 44 slain commandos would receive full police honors equivalent to the Gold Cross Medal. Police Chief Superintendent Generoso Serbo Jr. also said the PNP Board has recommended the Medalya ng Kagitingan, the highest honor awarded for a deed of personal bravery and self-sacrifice above and beyond the call of duty. They would also be given posthumous promotion, as well as financial and transportation services on the funeral day of their fallen loved one. He cited, "We will support them all the way. Tuloy-tuloy ito. Ayaw naming nagdadalamhati na sila, nahihirapan pa sila." The surviving members of the 84th SAC, along with PO2 Christopher Lalan, will be given one rank promotion as well. The first Senate hearing and investigation on the Mamasapano incident occurred on February 9. Among attendees were the senators, the PNP-BOY members, Director Purisima, Director Espina, the now relieved Director Napeñas, the respective Mindanao ground commanders, and some of the direct families of the slain commandos. In one of Napeñas' introductory statement highlights, he stood by his diction that,
"I am not, and I was not, and I will never be a bata to anyone."
This statement referred to the report by retired Police Chief Superintendent Rodolfo Mendoza, describing him as a bata or a prodigy, being decorated to be the successor to Director Purisima. He also addressed the public misconception of,
"Tila pinabayaan naming mga opisyal ang aming mga tauhan na pasukin ang lugar ng kalaban, na walang maayos na pagplano at kahandaang isinagawa bago ang nasabing pagsugod, na walang koordinasyon na nangyari sa pagitan ng mga kapulisan at ng mga sundalo, na kami ay naging pabaya at ang kapabayaang ito ang naging dahilan kung bakit 44 sa aming kasamahan sa SAF ay di nagawa pang makabalik sa kanilang mga pamilya."
He deemed that there was enough time for all preparation and planning, as well as the involvement of various qualified personnel for the operation. The Senate hearing would also reveal that a meeting with President Aquino and Purisima in January 9 in Bahay Pangarap, the former would order him to coordinate this operation with the AFP. However, Purisima would halt Napeñas and say, "Saka mo nasabihan yung dalawa pag nandun na. Ako nang bahala kay General Katapang." He understood that the yung dalawa phrase in this statement referred to Secretary of Interior and Local Government Mar Rojas and PNP-OYC Leonardo Espina. He would also clarify that he took this as a judgment call rather than a direct order from Purisima, knowing that he was already suspended at that time. MILF Peace Panel Chairman Mohaguer Iqbal was notably absent during this hearing. Two more Senate hearings would ensue on February 10 and February 12, but there would be no clear indications except pinpointing the lack of coordination and the lack of accountability on the MILF side. The Senate committee report would also label the clash a massacre, ultimately pinning the blame to President Aquino for his responsibility as the commander-in-chief. On March 9, 2015, the PNP-BOY would release its final report on the Mamasapano encounter. In its 130-page full report, it exalted the following findings. 1. Chain of command. The PNP's chain of command was violated. This pertains to President Noynoy Aquino, suspended PNP Chief Alan Purisima, and SAF Director Napeñas, keeping the information to themselves and failing to inform PNP OIC Leonardo Espina and Secretary of Interior and Local Government Mar Rojas. 2. Principle of Command Responsibility. As with the PNP's existing concept, the principle of command responsibility demands that a commander is responsible for all that his unit does or fails to do. Since day one, Director Napeñas had been openly admitting that he had full command responsibility over Oplan Exodus. 3. Coordination. The concept of time on target limits the disclosure of information to key personnel and is applicable to ordinary police operations. The AFP admitted that the TOT concept is counter to their established standard operating procedures. The lack of coordination or support to operating units, such as artillery or air support, would not be possible since these elements require planning and preparations. 4. Operation Plan. In this finding, it was detailed here that Oplan Exodus was not approved by the OIC PNP. It would be found out that Napeñas had dominated the entire operations from start to finish. In an enemy-controlled community, the unrealistic assumption was a high-risk operation. 5. Execution. Oplan Exodus execution was deemed to be ineffective because it was defective right from the start. Mismanaged troop movement, unable to occult designated waypoints and schedule, lack of effective communication among operating troops, command and control was deemed ineffective, and there was no coordination with AFP forces and the peace mechanism entities, the CCCH and AHJAG. 6. Command and control. The SAF's TCP and ACP were plagued by failures of command and control from the start, especially the aspect of communication. The use of mobile phones as primary communication methods meant the need to deliver real-time information and coordination of activities was at risk. There were radio operators at the TCP for both 84th and the 55th, but both lost contact during critical points of the mission. 7. Logistics. Some M2OG rifles were found to be defective. There was sufficient ammunition for each operation troop, but the overwhelming strength of the enemy caused their ammunition to run out eventually. The Motorola handheld radios used in the operation failed when it submerged in the water because they were not designed for military-type operations. Even the battery life was cut short due to eventual wear and tear. 8. AFP response. Part of the original plan was to have the AFP provide artillery support in case of encounter. In consideration of the ongoing peace process and the absence of protocol compliance, the AFP did not deliver artillery fire support when and where it was critically needed. Nevertheless, the AFP did provide infantry and mechanized units for reinforcements. White phosphorus rounds were fired, but it was too late, especially for the 55th. 9. Peace process mechanisms. Members of the CCCH and AHJAG did their best effort to reinstate the ceasefire between SAF and MILF combatants. However, the participation of other armed groups such as the BIFF, BIAF, PAGs, and other civilians that got involved ultimately delayed the movement of the CCCH and the promulgation of the ceasefire. 10. United States involvement. US agents were involved in intelligence operations and medical evacuations. However, there were no US troops involved in the actual combat operations. Their main involvement was providing technical support for ground troops monitoring and the later DNA identification of Marwan's finger. 11. Post-mission actions. The PNP Crime Laboratory report revealed that 4 SAF commandos had fatal gunshot wounds to the head and mid-portion of the trunk, revealing that these were death blows delivered at close range. This assumed that not all 44 SAF troopers died in a firefight, but rather executed at close range by the enemy. In addition, 16 SAF firearms and 1 cell phone had been returned by the MILF, but had noted that some parts of the rifle had been replaced. Detailed on the PNP BOI findings are also the autopsy report conducted on the slain commandos. From the report by the PNP Crime Laboratory, the autopsy report revealed that 5 SAF troopers with already fatal gunshot wounds were given coup de grace or final death blows at extreme close range. 11 others appeared to have been likely killed in the same manner, while the remaining 28 suffered fatal GSWs consistent with a firefight involving high-powered firearms. The 5 SAF troopers who were concluded to have been given death blows were 55th SAC members, Police Senior Inspector Ryan Pabalinas, PO2 Aman Esmula, POG Victoriano Acain, PO2 Joseph Sagonoy, and 84th SAC Team Leader Police Inspector Reni Tyrus. Further examination revealed that while Pabalinas was shot at close range when he was already dead, the other 4 had been given death blows while they were alive. Additional findings indicate that these commandos were stripped off their bulletproof vests before being shot lying on the ground. The PNP-BOY report also drew findings that the elements that had engaged the 55th SAC were likely from the MILF, the group that the government had ongoing peace talks with. First, Mamasapano Mayor Benzar Ampatuan and Barangay Captain Ismael Asim of Barangay Tocanalipao stated that the municipality of Mamasapano is composed of 70 to 80% MILF members. Second, the AFP confirmed that the cornfield area where members of the 55th SAC were pinned is within the jurisdiction of the MILF's 105th Base Command. And third, PO2 Joseph Sagonoy, who was the SAF trooper in the viral video being shot at close range while still alive, was carrying a Fair France sword caliber 5.56 rifle with serial number FF01051. This same exact firearm was surrendered by the MILF to the PNP through the CCCH. It highly indicated that those involved in the gunfight with the 55th were members of the MILF. Meanwhile, the MILF would release its 35-page Special Investigative Commission report on March 24, 2015. In their narrative, they would state that around 4:30 a.m. of January 25, BIAF forces in Barangay Tocanalipao heard gunshots and learned of the presence of the government forces in nearby Barangay Toca. They then immediately set out for Sitio Amilil, where troops belonging to the 105th BC assemble when an attack against their community is present. On their way to Sitio Amilil, they heard gunfire from the direction of Barangay Pembalacan. Upon reaching the now famous wooden bridge, they were fired upon from across the river. 2 of their men, Omar Dagastas and Ali Ismael, were hit and died. They fell back and took defensive positions at the cornfield behind them. It was still dark at the time and they did not know what group they were shooting at. As the sun dawned, gunfire escalated and more BIAF members came and joined in. Most of the forces were from the 105th, but there were a few from the 118th. About 100 BIAF members would eventually be involved, with the gunfight at its peak between 9 o'clock a.m. and 1 o'clock p.m. In the aftermath of the gunfight, 13 BIAF members died while 25 were injured. At around 1 p.m., the cornfield gunfight would officially cease. The BIAF men went to the cornfields to collect their dead in observance of their Islamic tradition that the dead should be buried within 24 hours. During this time, they took this opportunity to collect war booties. After 20 minutes, Commander Goma called his men and instructed them to withdraw because the MILF had issued a ceasefire order and that the JCCT members were on their way to the encounter site. In their withdrawal, they noticed members of the BIFF and some PAG members were coming in. 4 more MILF members from the 105th BC would be killed the next day, January 26. All these killings would be attributed to the escaping PO2 Christopher Lalan. After almost a day in hiding in the river, escaping sniper fire, and being bullet-strafed while submerged, PO2 Lalan would find his way to a small mosque locally known as Alangal. He was but a mere 2 kilometers away from their initial engagement site. 5 men from the 105th BC, Musib Kasim, Mamarisa Sandigan, Rasul Kamsa, Norhamid Angkay, and Melgar Sailila would be inside the Langal sleeping. The 4 had accompanied Sailila in his house in Sitio Amilil earlier to verify if the latter's house was damaged during the gunfight yesterday. After preparing and eating lunch, they prayed inside the Langal at 12 p.m. After the prayer, they all laid down on the floor to take a nap. About past 1 p.m., Melgar was awakened by the sound of a gunshot. He saw an armed and shirtless man standing by the door. The shirtless man had just shot the sleeping Musib. After a few seconds, the man again shot his 2 other companions, first Rasul and then Nur Hamid. All 3 instantly died in their sleep. After the 3rd gunshot, Mamarisa awoke and tried to get up, but he was shot by the shirtless man as well. Melgar realized what was going on and jumped out the opening wall on the side of the Langal. The armed man pursued him but he was able to outrun him and escape. Later at 2 p.m., 4 civilians, Sheikh Abdullah Abad, Muhammad Ambilang, Kapital Jainal, and Mataya Sanki, saw PO2 Lalan near the wooden bridge shirtless and holding an Armalite. As Lalan was approaching them, Abad shouted, "Civilian kami, wag ka magpaputok." They even raised their arms to show they were unarmed. P.O. Tulalan leveled his firearm at one of them, Muhammad Ambilang. Ambilang then turned around and tried to run away, but P.O. Tulalan fired at him. Ambilang dropped to the ground dead, and the rest of them fled and saw P.O. Tulalan chase them for a few meters, but then gave up. They would later go back to where Ambilang was shot and would find him there, lifeless. All of them, including Sailila, would later positively identify P.O. Tulalan based on a series of photographs shown to them during the investigation. In summarized findings of the MILF-SIC report, the following questions are herewith indicated with a concluded response. 1. What led to the armed clashes between the PNP SAF and the BIAF forces in the early morning of January 25, 2015? The PNP SAF operation on January 25, 2015 caught the BIAF by surprise. The action done by the 105th BC was justified, as this is the usual practice whenever there are impending clashes. The main purpose of this practice is to ensure clashes don't happen in civilian-populated areas. The BIAF cannot be faulted for concluding that the PNP SAF forces that they encountered in Sitio Amilil were enemies, since there was no coordination between the AHJAG and CCCH mechanisms of both the government and the MILF. It also asserted that it was the 55th SAC who fired first at the 105th BC, which they supported with circumstantial evidence. First, the 55th SAC was already in the cornfield, and the 105th BC was just moving in when gunshots were fired. The killings of Dagasdas and Esmael would prove to be the supporting evidence to this. Second, very little illumination was present at that time, hindering the possibility of the 105th BC seeing the 55th SAC that were all in prone positions on the cornfield. This was better supported by the statement that the 55th SAC had night vision goggles. In summary, it indicated that there was violation of a ceasefire agreement implementing guidelines between the MILF and the government signed way back in November 14, 1997. 2. Were there lapses on the ground in heeding the call for ceasefire? The ceasefire implementation efforts by the MILF-CCCH elements were hampered by several factors during the course of the events. First, the weak signal in the encounter area from the cellular phones proved to be a hindrance in delivering timely updates. 2. The fighting had already begun when the CCCH and IMT intervened, where it had already turned into a battle of survival. And 3. The ceasefire mechanisms did not follow the standard protocol as laid out in the agreement. However, it was deemed that the 105th BC stopped firing as soon as the ceasefire was relayed to them. Unfortunately, the ceasefire had reached the 105th BC at 1:30 PM, when almost all of the 55th SAC had already been killed. 3. Did the BIAF use unnecessary force in fighting the PNP SAF? Did they engage in mutilation? Did they desecrate the dead? Despite the eventual advantages that the 105th BC had over the 55th SAC, they did not use unnecessary force or any unfair warfare methods that violated the international humanitarian law. They were cited as faced their adversaries employing the weapons that were available to them and using their advantages to the fullest. The reported mutilation and desecration of bodies were unfounded. The viral video pertaining to the killing of P.O. Tusagonoy does not clearly indicate that the assailant was from the 105th BC. The statement also claims that there were other groups in the area during the gunfight, particularly the BIFF and other PAGs. Their claim is that they only moved the dead when it was necessary to get their firearms as part of their war booty claim. Also, most of the bodies were retrieved by local people when the municipal government had mobilized civilians to help in the retrieval. 4. Did the BIAF members take the firearms and personal effects of the dead SAF? If yes, is this justified? When the gunfight waned by 1:00 PM of January 25, members of the BIAF took this opportunity to retrieve the bodies of their fallen brothers, as well as collecting war booties from the 55th SAC. This was deemed as nothing extraordinary and acceptable behavior of armed non-state actors under Rule 49 of customary international humanitarian law. The mentioned rule states, the parties to the conflict may seize military equipment belonging to an adverse party as a war booty. Still in the interest of the peace agreement, these firearms collected as war booties were surrendered to the government on February 18, 2015. The MILF leadership took the initiative of asking their men to return the firearms. It was also important to take note that when Mayor Ampatuan requested the return of personal belongings and equipment of the slain commandos, some civilians showed up and returned the belongings. This proved to be a basis that not all lost material on the battlefield ended up in the hands of the MILF. 5.
Did the MILF cuddle Basit Usman and Marwan? The report claimed MILF and Mamasapano local residents did not know that Marwan and Usman were in their community. The hut where Marwan was killed is a dalsan, a place where farmers can temporarily stay while working on farm lots. This 8 by 12 feet dalsan previously belonged to Ustads Bagindali, a BIAF member who died in 2008. The hut is actually in Barangay Pembalacan, where the BIFF and the BIFF breakaway group of Muhammad Ali Tambaco were based. This area is not within control nor presence of MILF. The encounter site, however, is under the jurisdiction of the 105th BC, about 2 kilometers away from Sitio Amilil. It was also indicated that as early as 2005, Marwan and other individuals with terrorist tags have been ordered to leave MILF camps and communities. This is in respect to the peace talks negotiation with the government and also policy in the AHJAG. This policy states that the MILF should coordinate and cooperate with the AFP and PNP in the interdiction of criminal elements in MILF communities. The MILF SIC report on the alleged cuddling of the terrorists also claimed the following information. Interviewed local residents claimed that they knew Marwan only by the name Mads and had no idea he was an international wanted terrorist. Based on the trajectory of bullet holes in the hut and the injuries sustained by Marwan, the fatal shot that killed him must have been done at close range and while he was already lying on the floor. The sparse provisions inside the hut, as well as the thick vegetation growth of weeds circulating around the hut, meant that the area was just recently occupied. Additional information revealed that the body of Marwan was retrieved and then buried by the forces of Muhammad Ali Tambaco around Barangay Pembalacan and Dasikil, known layers of the BIFF and the mentioned breakaway group leader. In July 15, 2015, the National Bureau of Investigation filed charges on 102 members of the MILF, BIFF, and PAGs. The NBI has charged these individuals with direct assault with murder for the killing of 35 members of the 55th SAC. Alongside it is an additional charge for committed theft for taking of the firearms, gears, and personal belongings of the slain commandos. The charges were filed on grounds based on eyewitness accounts, forensic examinations, and other evidence gathered. The lone testimony of one person, codenamed Marathon, was also used as anchor to identify the involved MILF members. Marathon is a Mamasapano resident and had executed 3 sworn statements based on interviews conducted on him.
In Marathon's sworn statement, he said he was awakened at around 2 o'clock a.m. of January 25 by a burst of gunfire coming from the area where Basit Usman lives. At 3 o'clock a.m., he saw around 24 members of the MILF and a BIFF commander. However, when the gunfight between the 55th SAC and 105th BC had started, he was hiding around the area until 7 o'clock a.m. He would detail that there would eventually be about 250 men from the combined forces of MILF, BIFF, and a group of men he labeled as Massacre that joined the barrage against the 55th. He would hide in a safe spot until 7 o'clock a.m., where he again moved to a better spot so that he could see the men. He was watching the gunfight in hopes of getting guns from the men trapped in the middle cornfield. At 8 o'clock a.m., Marathon learned that the MILF, BIFF, and Massacre knew that they were fighting with policemen. In his sworn statement, he mentioned, "Narinig ko doon sa mga MI at Freedom na mga pulis pala ang kalaban nila." Outgunned and exhausted, 5 SAF members stood out of the cornfield and surrendered at around 9 o'clock a.m. They were already heavily wounded that time and were pleading for their lives, but would still be shot by the armed rebel groups. After the shooting stopped, some of the armed rebels crossed the river and got the personal belongings of the dead commandos. He also said that some of the men had dragged the cadavers and kicked them towards the river. They then would leave the place as soon as they were done collecting the equipment and belongings. The rest of his testimonies proved to be highly reliable evidence, as he had been at the engagement site during and after the gunfight. When Marathon was shown 4 videos related to the encounter, he confirmed that the 2 were taken in Barangay Tucanalipao after the firefight, while the other 2 were not. In one of the videos, he confirmed that the dead bodies lying around the cornfield are indeed from the 55th SAC. He would also surmise that the MILF, BIFF, and Massacre group worked hand in hand during the fight, even borrowing guns from each other. He also positively identified several men in their complete name and affiliation, and whether that man joined the Pintakasi or not. His testimony would also reveal one huge statement for the investigation. He knew Marwan and Usman were wanted by the government, and many of the residents of Mamasapano knew that they were there. They are also aware of the bounties in their head. They, however, only knew the name Marwan when he heard in one of the news after the incident. Marwan was locally known to them as Buds, while Usman was known as Teng. 1 week later, July 22, the Ombudsman Special Fact-Finding Panel filed administrative and criminal charges against 11 police officers, led by former PNP Chief Director Alan Purisima. Purisima will face charges of usurpation of official functions for his role in Oplan Exodus. Him and Apeñas are also liable for neglect of duty, including 8 other police officials, which included Police Chief Superintendent Talino and Police Superintendent Train. The special panel, however, would absolve President Aquino of any criminal liability, citing whatever participation the president may have had in the Mamasapano incident does not amount prima facie to a criminal offense. Neither was his participation analogous to any of the impeached offenses. On January 27, 2016, 1 year after the tragic events in Mamasapano, the Senate would conduct another hearing. A full presentation of the Philippine Military Report would be discussed in this. In the presentation, they would present issues raised against the AFP regarding the decisions and corresponding actions that were done during the crisis. 1. Alleged delayed reinforcements. Question: why didn't the AFP send help immediately? Did the strategy to promote the peace process hinder the AFP from engaging in a more aggressive response? Actions and responses. The AFP immediately consolidated and organized reinforcing troops upon knowledge of the situation. Troops were deployed as early as 6:30 a.m. and reinforcing troops arrived at SAF command post by 9 o'clock a.m. By the end of the 84th SA extraction, a total of 211 personnel and 6 armored vehicles were deployed as reinforcements. 2. Artillery fire. Question: artillery support from 6th IDPA was not delivered when needed most due to ongoing peace process and protocols in the use of artillery. Should the AFP have fired the white phosphorus and artillery around much earlier? Actions and responses. The mandatory information for delivery of field artillery fires were not present during the first 4 requests from the SAF. It was only in the 5th request at 5:35 p.m. where the necessary information was available that the artillery fires were delivered. 4 essential elements of fire support are needed. 1. Location of friendly forces, forward observer, and civilian population. 2. Location of enemy or target. 3. Description of target. And 4. Method of engagement of target. There was no forward observer and the AFP had no radio contact with the engaged SAF during the first 4 requests. 3. Alleged stand-down order. Question: the AFP was allegedly ordered to stand down to protect the peace process with the MILF. Actions and responses. There was no stand-down order from higher authorities. Both Commander of the 6th ID and Western Mindanao Command initiated actions to support the SAF throughout the day. The military report also presented detailed factors that derailed Oplan Exodus. First, redeployment of forces prior to the incident. Much of the forces were dispersed throughout the area on January 25. Apart from several battalion forces redeployed outside their area of responsibility, there was an ongoing operation from the 6th Infantry Division in SK Pendatun, Maguindanao. The nearest forces that could provide infantry support were the 4th to 5th Infantry Battalion in Dato Unsay, 1st Mechanized Brigade in Sharif Aguac, and PPO Maguindanao in Dato Hofer, all of which were about 11 to 12 kilometers away from the location of the engagement. Second, the deliberate holding of information about the SAF operation misleading both AFP and local PNP forces. Other factors included were lack of interoperability of communication radios, different maps used, no established tactical command post, the lack of PNP knowledge regarding the AFP call for fire and ceasefire protocols, lack of coordination, lack of tactical plan presentation to the AFP, and the evident lack of sense of urgency on the part of Director Napeñas. This particular factor highly criticized a photo of Napeñas happily smiling and in civilian uniform, indicating he had no sense of urgency and clearly lacking situational awareness and diction as a leader. Napeñas, in an interview months later, would clarify this and say this was done to minimize suspicion to locals who would possibly leak information had he been seen in an official police uniform. To this day, only 3 publicized arrests have been made against the rebel assailants. 1. Tamano Ismail Sabpa, arrested in April 2019 in Cotabato City. 2. Abu Halili, sub-commander for the 105th BC, arrested in February 2020 in Cotabato City. And 3. Nakiman Dawaling, arrested in his residence in Barangay Poblacion in May 2020.
In July 2017, the Office of the Ombudsman filed in the Sandigan Bayan charges of graft and usurpation of official functions against former President Noynoy Aquino, Purisima, and Napeñas. However, they would be cleared of the more serious charge of reckless imprudence resulting to multiple homicide. He would be absolved of criminal liability upon his abrupt death in June 2021. Purisima would be expelled from service in June 2015 following his alleged involvement in a shady 100 million peso deal with Werfast Documentary Agency Incorporated. Napeñas, while relieved from his position, remained in service until his mandatory retirement in July 2015. He later pursued a career in the government by running in the 2016 senatorial election, citing platforms for the betterment and wellness for all men and women in uniform. He, however, failed to secure a Senate seat, placing 33rd overall. The death of the 44 policemen reminded us that there are hundreds and thousands of men out there who are willing to risk their lives for protecting our peace and sovereignty. As a final word, here is a heartfelt quote from PNP SAF OIC Noli Talino, delivered during his eulogy.
While you enjoy the laughter of family and friends, and the safety and comfort of your homes, there are men and women who sacrifice time, effort, and their very lives in the fulfillment of their jobs and duties to give you normalcy. These are the men and women in the Special Action Force, dedicated officers, dedicated troopers who know how to die.